Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion this afternoon. And if you're joining us from other time zones, good morning to rest of you. Uh, Before doing anything further, I would like to take this opportunity to share our land acknowledgement with you. EHRC would like to acknowledge that we conduct business on the ancestral and unceded territories of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people across the Turtle Island. Uh, EHRC's head office is located on the traditional unceded territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, whose enduring presence and contribution we deeply honor. As a national organization, we recognize the vital role of Indigenous people in Canada's past, present, and future. We are committed to supporting reconciliation through our work, partnership, and actions, respecting the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples, and striving to build relationships based on respect, dignity, trust, and cooperation. On behalf of Electricity Human Resource Canada, thank you for joining us today for this panel on International Women's Day, Beyond the First, what real gender equity looks like in electricity sector. Uh, this conversation is part of a broader commitment to ensure that equity, safety, and accountability remain central to the future of our sector. And it's now my pleasure to turn it over to our moderator, Michelle Brannigan, CEO of EHRC. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And thank you for joining us for this International Women's Day's conversation. International Women's Day is often a moment to celebrate milestones, whether that is increased representation, visible signs of progress. Sometimes still, even it relates to the first of a role, the first woman in a role, etc. And those milestones matter. But today we're going to ask a little bit of a deeper question. We want to ask, is representation actually translating into equity? And are we building workplaces that women can not only enter, but stay, advance, and lead safely? And so, of course, in the electricity sector, we understand risk management. We understand accountability in the sector, and we understand long-term planning. That's all part of the nature of the sector. But the question really applies as to whether we're applying those same disciplines when it comes to gender equity. And in the research that EHRC has been collecting on gender equity for the last 20 years, we know that we're not seeing much progress. Women are averaging about 20%, 27% still in the sector. And when you look at it where those women are actually working, the picture is even more uneven. We have about 11% in the engineering field, about 6% in the trade, 6% single digits, 8% in ICTC, and 14% in management. And then the other 60% are in other areas, HR, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not just dealing with an underrepresentation or a lack of women in the sector. That's one component, but we're also seeing that the women who are with us are not spread across the full spectrum of roles where we could see them, and particularly in decision-making roles. So we're going to have an honest but a constructive conversation today, and we're going to reflect on process, acknowledge some of the gaps, and leave with clarity, I hope, about what meaningful change requires. We always want to, at EHRC, we always want to leave you with some practical things that you can take away in your day-to-day to affect change or to make your work in this area easier. And I'm really glad that today we are joined by three powerhouses in Canada's electricity sector, from advancing women in renewable energy to representing professionals across the industry, and also to shaping policy and culture at the regulatory level. Their collective leadership speaks to both progress and possibility. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Joanna Osawe, who is the President and CEO of Women in Renewable Energy. Canada and worldwide. Lenore Robson, who's the VP of People, Culture and Strategic Policy at the Ontario Energy Board, and Rebecca Caron, who is the President of the Society of United Professionals. So welcome everyone around the table, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I want to start on a personal note with everybody. Rebecca, maybe I'll start with you. When you think back to your early career, what shaped your path the most to where you are today? Was it a barrier? Was it a barrier, a mentor, a turning point? And how did that moment influence the type of leader that you are today?
Thank you, Michelle. When I began my career at Pickering Nuclear Generating Station, the class, I started in radiation protection, and that particular class of folks that I was with almost half women in that particular class of a group of 20. And so that was sort of a shift from previous, I guess, opportunities within the nuclear sector where you didn't see a lot of women in the station, in the field, in that type of particular work. But as I continued in that role, what I noticed, and then when I shifted, as I worked through the organization into leadership, I was often the only woman in the plant, on shift, the only woman on the crew, and the only woman in a leadership role. And so what it meant to me was I was in an environment working that wasn't built for me or built for other women like me. And it meant I was constantly being, challenged and questioned and facing different stigma. So part of the realities of my lived experience was working twice as hard and producing more work than my peers, still expected to do, the paperwork in addition to leading teams. And so all of that stigma and those barriers truly made me realize that my approach had to be different, that I had to gain folks' respect and get an acknowledgement that, yes, I'm your supervisor because of the skills I bring to the table. And realizing that the team around me will not thrive if we don't collaborate. A thriving team isn't a result of being ruled by a leader. So I guess the aha or breakthrough moment for me was understanding that being a leader means building relationships in a collaborative and humble way, and demonstrating your value to the employees and helping the team do what they need to do by being the barrier remover yourself. I mean, to be specific, I'm not an electrician, so it's not reasonable for me to expect me to go out and do that particular type of work. But my duty as their leader is to get the barriers out of the way that's preventing them from doing the work that they need to do. So that's sort of my aha moment.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I love that getting the barriers out of the way. I think that's so important from a leadership perspective. And I know we'll get into accountability and culture a little bit later. But just picking on that point where you said that lived experience and having to work twice as hard. And I know a lot of the women that I've talked to over the years and the research that we've done in this area, that has been echoed. And to be quite frank, they have said it's absolutely exhausting, because you're constantly having to do that double load, or when you move from group to group, or especially if you change crews or navigate your career, having to prove yourself all over again gets very exhausting. Lenore, I'm going to go to you on that same question.
So a lot of what Rebecca said resonates with me. When I was thinking about this, though, I think what's really shaped the way I lead is having had so many bad male leaders myself. And I always thought, this is how, I would do this differently if I was a people leader. If I got into management, these are the things that I would change. And what I mean by that is I think women inherently are more compassionate, thoughtful leaders. I would have male leaders who would hold over on my head if I needed to structure my day to reflect childcare or wait until the last possible moment to approve my vacation requests, or, didn't empower me in the work that I was doing. They tended to, micromanage, took all the credit themselves, didn't share that. I didn't feel that my voice was equally heard. And in many cases, I feel that there was a time, kind of like the Taylor Swift song, if I was a man, like, would I have, excelled in my career much quicker? Being a woman can be a real barrier sometimes in that sense. But so that's kind of shaped the way that I lead now. I think we need to be very flexible and recognize we're bringing our whole selves. We're going to have maybe it's aging parents or sick kids, or things that you need to deal with. You need to create flexibility for people to do their work. I also very much well believe in paying it forward, and that means sponsoring other females within our organization and helping pave the way for them, but showing them how to get there, and really teaching them everything from, like, my secrets to calendar management, so that I'm not, drained at the end of the day, things that, nobody really taught me when I became a leader. And using what I think is this position and this role to really create positive impact on others. I see it as a privilege, and I don't take that lightly. And then lastly, I would say it's about not just being highly competent in the work that you do, but I think it's also about how you get involved in your organization and how do you contribute to shape the workplace culture. And I think that's so important in starting out in my career.
Thanks, Lenore. And I love that, even getting into those simple things sometimes that we forget about, like even like the calendar management, or guarding your focus time, or understanding what's critical versus urgent. And those types of learnings can be really important. And sometimes just even learning how to say no, right?
Yes, 100%.
Like
creating that, instead of that to-do list, creating that, like, stop doing list. That is so important. Mm-hmm.
To have the ability or the courage to say that, depending on where they're at, right? So, Joanna, over to you.
Yeah, I definitely echo what Lenore said, because I think that when I look back, it was actually a barrier that shaped me most, but it was one that I didn't even know existed at the time. When I first started, the biggest barrier was the myth of the checklist. So I'm not an engineer. However, every single job that I've had within the energy sector, I was required to have a PNG. Again, we all need all hands on deck. I do want to reflect also on what Rebecca said about being, the only female in the field on the construction site. I can definitely relate to that, because when I was a commercial wind developer, I was always the only female boots on the ground. Never welcomed, a lot of derogatory comments. And as you said, Rebecca, often you were, you're part of the women on the crew, right? And I think that, that really brings and elevates, I guess, my blood pressure at this point too, because I'm still seeing a lot of gaps within that. I always often tell individuals, do not check that myth checklist on a job description. I was applying for jobs that I had no business applying for, and I honestly wouldn't be where I am today. I also want to comment on, I've actually had several bad women leaders that instead of rising me up, they would actually de-escalate me. And I felt I can definitely comment on one personal thing that happened to me with a woman leader. And this is back, oh my gosh, back in the 2006. So definitely dating myself. But and I was a commercial wind developer at the time. And I remember asking a question because I was relatively new into the industry. And I remember asking her a question in regards to wind development. And in front of everyone, she told me what a stupid question that was. I was definitely taken aback. Certainly the following days, she apologized and definitely made sure that, we engage in a serious discussion. So that really, again, I've had bad women leaders. However, I've definitely had my share of bad male leaders. one thing that, I definitely want to talk about too is on the sponsorship level, because mentorship and sponsorship are very different, is that it's a two-way street of accountability. I feel that when a senior leader sponsors a woman for a C-suite role, they're putting their own social capital on the line, in my opinion. They're saying, I bet my reputation on her success. And I think that that's really important that we know. I really am a huge believer in male allyship. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the male sponsors that I've had and also the female mentors and sponsors that I've had. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joanna. And I'm going to stick to you. I'm going to roll back onto a question just to pick up on some of the things you talked about there. And I really like some of the mentorship and the sponsorship piece. I know we'll talk about a little bit more. But even that, when we're looking for male allies, I think it's important to recognize that some of your barriers can exist from female leaders as well. There's still a lot of work to do, and so that we would be naive or remiss if we didn't also mention that. So you talked a little bit about the leadership, so it's a really nice segue, Joanna, in regards to some of the things that you've seen in the past. What visible barriers that do you still see that are still there from a leadership perspective when we look at those leadership pathways for women, and particularly those that are not maybe written in policy, but they're actually come from a culture, like a cultural perspective or a cultural lens?
That's a great question. And I often feel that women are being judged on our past performances while our male peers are judged on their potentials, which I feel that that's something that is still a huge barrier. I just talked about that myth checklist, checking every single box. Um, we need to move away from hiring in our own image and start valuing intersectional leadership, the ability to also bridge engineering, policy, and community engagement. Again, if we're going to get to net zero, and I talk about this often, we need to be all hands on deck. And I definitely want to talk a little bit about, because WIRE is a global NGO. We are headquartered here out of Canada. However, I can't tell you, and I can't stress enough, Michelle, how often when I bring the international team together, and I always tell them, please bring, the problems that you're navigating. I can't tell you how quickly, as from a global perspective, we're able to solve the problems because, I call it global, be global, but act local. So what's right for, Wire Canada may not be right for Wire Africa, may not be right for Wire UAE, and so forth. And I can tell you from different perspectives from a global scale, it really does resonate. And it definitely, again, I'm so blessed and grateful to have these remarkable women throughout the world that give me a very different perspective at all times. And they actually bring awareness and education. Feminism, as we know, is very different in North America than it is in Europe and so forth and so forth. So, for some, feminism is a bad word. I'm a very proud feminist, especially for International Women's Day. It really brings me and highlights the joy that I have. There's also the competence trap that I've been reflecting on a lot because I find that often women, Michelle, you talked about in your opening discussion about, being, 6%, low digits, 5% for C-suite. But I find that we're still not at the table where we need to be. We're not at the board of directors table. We're not at the C-suite. We're still being tasked with administrative duties. And that to me is not the path to becoming on the C-suite level. We need to be there for capital expenditures. We need to be there for the grid reliability decisions. And that way we're actually heading and in the right direction.
No, that's so true, Joanna. And there's a couple of things there, even when you look at women on boards of directors and we have seen progress. I don't want it to be all doom and gloom for folks on call. Like, we are seeing some great leadership come through in the electricity sector, but the data tells the story in regards to, it's very firm on that our numbers are not moving where they need to be. We also need to be very careful not to have that tokenism piece creep in, right? Or have that one person on the board one person in the leadership team, because it's not good for that individual to be the only of anything. Is a very lonely place to be, right? So so that's important. And you also mentioned something that I just wanted to speak to, and that's the intersectionality piece, because I think it's very important that we don't just all put one woman or women writ large into one bucket. We all have very different perspectives that we bring based on our sort of our social construct, right? So whether you're a woman who is Black, you are a woman who is an immigrant, you are a woman who is Indigenous, very, very different stories. Even if you're a parent versus somebody who's taking care of elderly parents and have no children, where everybody has different challenges, but also different strengths and experiences to bring to the table. And so I think that's really important for us to remember when we're having this conversation as well. So thanks for bringing that up. Rebecca, yeah, absolutely, please. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd be interested in, is it that we're not necessarily promoting women to board roles, or do they not feel that they have the structure and the resources to step up into those positions, and so they're not applying for them in the first place? And kind of picking up on Joanna's comment about, you know, that myth checklist and feeling like they don't meet all the boxes, so they're not going to apply anyway. So it's kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, like, are we not getting women on boards because they don't feel they have the capacity to do that, or because they're not being selected?
Does anyone want to jump in to respond to that?
I can definitely jump in. I mean, I sit on several boards, and definitely there's one board in particular that I'm going to be stepping down from just because of that tokenism, Lenore and Michelle. I feel that, you know, over the years that I've been on this board, I've really encouraged and recommended that we bring in not only women, but underrepresented groups. Having a diverse voice at the table really brings in a lot more solution making. And to answer your question, and probably not to the fullest, Lenore, is that I don't feel that women are actually applying for these positions, right? There are several, and this is for the audience, there are several recruiters out there that you can definitely reach out to, and they actually not only deal with hiring processes, but they actually deal with board of directors. Reach out to them and get yourself engaged as well. Odgers is a great example. I've been working with Odgers for years now, and there's a lady that I work with, and her entire executive recruitment is about bringing people into board of directors. It's not about jobs, and she actually walks you through how to get your CV ready, because governance CV is very different than your career CV. They actually offer a lot of great courses for free as well. I think that, you know, just make sure that you're aware that there are so many opportunities out there. I'm happy to share later on with the team also. There's different appointments through whether it's Global Affairs Canada, whether it's NRCan, there's different appointments that you can actually apply for. They're not remunerated, but at least get yourself involved. So
Yeah,
not sure if that answers.
no, I think that's really good advice, Joanna. And I do think a lot of management, and especially people who are in a senior role, need to start saying it up more vocally when you see a board of directors or an entire senior management team in an organization in our industry that is fully male. I know I do. I will often go into the room and say, I've just had a quick look at, or I just saw your annual report, and I'm not seeing any women whatsoever on your board of directors, and that's a little alarming. And then you try and, you know, talk about the business case as to why that is not a good look for that organization. So I think we need to call it out when we see it as well too. I think that's important. Rebecca, we could talk all day, so I have to watch my questions, otherwise we get through them. This we probably need a few hours or half a day. But Rebecca, from a union perspective and members perspective, where do gender equity issues show up most clearly in the day-to-day workplace realities? What are the types of things that you're seeing? And then my follow-up question, sorry, just to prep you for that is what makes the difference between a workplace that actually listens and one that becomes sort of more, I guess, defensive to the feedback that's happening.
So the labor movement is dynamic. And I think in labor movement spaces, we have seen a significant shift in who we see around the table. We are seeing strong representation of genders and diverse backgrounds. And I think that's very much prevalent in the labor movement. And when you take a look at our individual industry, women probably make less than 30%. And you provided some statistics at the beginning. And so it's now time to really ask ourselves, why is that? Because I think there's more than one reason for it. And so we can ask each other this question. Many female leaders over the last 30 years, how many of them had to make sacrifices in order to be in the spaces that they're in now? And that they had to choose in order to get to that space. But we also have to be mindful that not everybody can or is willing to make those sacrifices, right? And that's a lot of the reason the realities that exist in this province, that the unemployment rate for women is higher, right? Because they have to take there are other priorities within the lives of women that supersede career paths. And so asking ourselves, why are they making these sacrifices? Because it thrives in the reality of our lives, because women are still the primary generational caregivers. And we're seeing a dynamic. It isn't just about, children. It's now, elder care. It's the reality. And women are shouldered with that responsibility. And so that's the landscape. And so if organizations and boards and companies and all these other spaces, if they are truly serious about gender equity, it's time to figure out, there's more than one why, but how do you address this? How do you create spaces for women, right, to thrive in the realities that exist for them? Because those who are able to thrive in their workplaces do so because the companies have policies that allow people, particularly women, they can have that career and they can have that balance in their lives to be able to do things in a way that doesn't completely burn them out, because burnout is a real reality for many of us.
That's so true, that burnout. And sometimes it doesn't always have to be. I think sometimes, I know when I talk to organizations, to companies, there's a feeling that there's massive change required to make some of these things happen. These changes, Rebecca, that would work against that burnout and make, especially with so many people trying to manage, whether it's elder care or whatever it may be, but it doesn't always have to be some major, massive, reorganizational change. Sometimes it can be just as small as providing, the flexibility around start times in the morning or pickup times in the afternoon, so that if somebody has kids, they have the opportunity to get them on the school bus or off. Or if somebody wants to do a parent check-in, they have the ability to do that. But there are things that are smaller that can make a really big difference in an organization. So I'm glad you sort of spoke to that area. Lenore, when we look at it from a policy and an organization perspective, and we're looking at governance and policy and et cetera, how do organizations measure real progress on gender equity? So what are the sort of things that you can do in an organization or that you see in your organization that ensure that it's embedded rather than performative? That's such an important difference.
Yeah, well, I think you touched upon some of this. It really is in that hard data that is reflecting kind of those equitable outcomes. So we're not just looking at activity, but we're looking at what is the representation like at all leadership levels? What is the pay equity? What is your promotion velocity? What is your turnover by gender? What do your succession pipelines look like? And what is the access to those high impact assignments? Like that, I think is all critical. So it's about, you talked about annual reporting. So I think it's definitely including it there. It's embedded in board scorecards. It's having CEO objectives reflected and even in performance incentive structures, right? It's seeing this as a business priority for the organization and not just like a side initiative. So not this is how we run the company, not this is a program for HR to manage. I think that's really important. So asking ourselves, how diverse are our hiring panels? Coming back to the comment about are women being sponsored rather than just mentored? How psychological safety, I think, is also really, really important. Like how safe do employees and women feel? And are women staying long term and thriving? Like those are clear indicators, right? You can get a lot of information tracking through employee engagement insights. I think you can get exit interviews are great ways as well. Feedback from focus groups. So I think it's moving away from performative, as you said, like statements, campaigns, events around International Women's Day and pay equity, but really looking at how it's embedded in our systems, our decisions, our outcomes, and how leaders are evaluated. I think that's really how you know it's real.
I like that piece, the because sometimes there is even I have found there's a presumption that we're doing one thing when it's actually not happening on the ground. And I think back to an organization I met with quite a number of years ago, and I talked to the entire senior leadership team, executive leadership team, and they said, no, everything is great, wonderful from a gender equity perspective and underrepresented groups, and everyone's happy. But when I actually talked further deeper down in the organization, there was actually a disconnect, especially from the women who were not in managerial roles and were not seeing themselves as having access to training, to professional development opportunities, to that career pathway that would give them an opportunity from a mentorship perspective in particular. So there was a huge disconnect between what senior leadership were seeing and then what was being felt by those further down in the organization. So I think it's really important to listen and for leaders to ensure that they are engaging throughout the organization. And I know one of the things that we've really worked on, and I know all of your organizations are part and parcel of the Leadership Accord on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, where we really try to bring in a framework to be able to help organizations identify where they sit, what actions they need to, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are, because we all have them and we're all on different levels of that continuum, and it's ongoing work when it comes to equity, diversity, inclusion, and gender equity. But to be able to provide a pathway so they can actually identify, okay, what is it we want to focus in on? But now we actually have to measure that, and we have to measure what those actions look like and what success looks like. And so that's with the Leadership Accord, and that's what we tried to do with that whole piece. I couldn't agree with you more. It's measurable outcomes. And to be honest, Lenore, we measure everything in this sector. The electricity sector, everything is measured, right? So finite. So we need to be able to measure what we're doing internally within our organizations and call ourselves out if things are not happening or not happening quickly enough, because we can't wait for another 30 years to move the dial 1% higher, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the challenge now. And even from a compensation perspective, there's a whole other piece that we could go into there. But really tracking progress, I think, is really important. You mentioned something there as well too, and I don't know, Lenore, if you want to sort of speak to it, or if any of you want to speak to this piece, but it's about psychological safety, and our electricity sector, of course, as you know, prides itself on a safety culture. It's embedded in everything that we do throughout our organizations. Do we define safety broadly enough right now to include psychological safety and protection from harassment, or for women, like for women in our organizations?
I think that's a great question. I think right now it's too narrow and really needs to be broadened. And I think that people often don't understand what the definition of psychological safety is, and that it's about the trust. It's about trust and leadership and how you're showing up. And I think that really starts from the top. Yeah, I don't know if my co-panelists have any thoughts on that.
Joanna, Rebecca?
I would say
No, but
we really have.
sorry, go ahead. No, please.
I would say we really have to go and take a good, hard, concrete look at the cultures in our organization. Like, let's be realistic here, 50% of the population is female, and women require different biological needs. And as opposed to, looking at these things from a shame perspective, it is reality. Let's be clear, it's reality. So, I mean, how can one as a woman feel psychologically safe in a workplace if she's shamed for her physiology or set back because of the fact that they're able and desire families? Like, it really is a fundamental core issue within society that we have to chip away at, because it no longer serves what needs to happen in order for us to meet our commitments to the growth in our sector. And it certainly does not fulfill our commitments to being, good members of communities in which we operate. We really need to have these tough conversations, because it is not about statistics. It's about how do we be good, responsible human beings in the work that we do for communities. And we really need to call these things what they are. And corporations and organizations need to take this as a fundamental need for change, because we will not be where we need to be, and the old ways no longer serve the new generations of workers that are coming.
I really want to echo you, Rebecca, on what you said, because for those that know me, I talk about you have to be uncomfortable with the comfortable, like being comfortable talking about it, right? Like, let's talk about the elephant in the room. I want to share actually a few things that Michelle just, when she was asking Lenore a question, and I like to be authentic and share my personal stories, because, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that. My father, who's a civil engineer, he he asked me, he's like, I think that you need to like stop wire. Like, you women are fine. And I'm like, oh, well, thanks for solving the world's problem, Richard. Um, I'm glad that we're going to wrap things up. So, and these are comments even from my family that are coming, right? Even another example, I was working for a different company at the time, and through Wire, I was invited at the time, our Prime Minister was Justin Trudeau. I was invited to a dinner, and not just me and Justin Trudeau, obviously, but I was one of the attendees. And I remember being in the boardroom table with all men. They're like, why you? Well, my answer back was, why not me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and I think that also, another example is like, I remember back when I was building wind farms, going through the airport security check. I was there with a gentleman who was my boss at the time. And they're like, oh, is that your assistant? It's like, well, no, I'm a commercial wind developer and I respect all positions. I don't care if you're a janitor to a lawyer I mean, but let's call each other out for who we are as well. And like, there's always this presumption. Michelle, you talked about also pay equity. One of the things that I'm really excited about is in 2026 in Ontario, it became the law that you need to share what the salary range looks like. So not all provinces in Canada are mandated. However, in Ontario it is. So I think that that's really important, because now we're moving the dial closer to where it needs to be. And then I think that also on the DEI perspective, and this is what Michelle and your entire team are doing. You're not offering lip service. You're doing things. You do things and then you talk about things, right? So I really applaud your entire team on the amazing work that you're carrying on, because it's a heavy load, and we got to continuously make sure that we're supporting each other.
Thanks, Joanna. Thanks to all of you for that's a really robust discussion. And it is unfortunate that we do have quite a lot of women who still have witnessed or experienced some sort of inappropriate behavior or gender-based discrimination in a work-related setting. We've done some research on that. And in 2020, Stats Canada had found that like over 47% of Canadian workers had witnessed or experienced that. And our own leadership report that we did a number of years ago found that 1 in 5 women had experienced personal experiences for harassment in the workplace or bullying. Could take different things, or even violence. So calling it out and being very aware. And I love that, Rebecca. Like, let's be honest. Like I think when we're moving the dial on this and moving forward, that is one of the biggest parts of the conversation that we need to have, is to actually have the conversation, and not sort of be too polite to bring it up. There's some really good questions. I know I have a final question, and I'll do in a lightning round, but I've just been watching some of the Q&A. We have people with us from Kenya as well, so a big shout out to Kenya today. Great that we have more folks from outside of Canada. A couple of really good questions, and I'm sort of going to blend the two of them together. One is, how can a mid-senior level executive or individual with more exposure and experience grow under an insecure or threatened leadership? And the other question, thanks, Vinny, is how can women at mid-senior level have avenues to voice their concerns? Because people in power sometimes abuse it and control the narrative. So those almost, for me, almost blend together a little bit. And I think I alluded to that at the beginning, especially when it comes to younger people. This is talking about mid-level professionals. So what can they do? But I know I see that a lot when you have younger women who are maybe afraid of speaking up, and even mid-level speaking up, being seen as a troublemaker. And is that going to hamper their career, etc.? So what advice would you three ladies have for somebody who's more at the mid-level of their career, starting out? What can they do in those situations?
So if they have any ERG groups, I mean, I would definitely start there. I know we've got a number of, at the OEB, we have a women at OEB group, we have a DEI group. I think those are great pathways to speak with others, see, is this being felt across the organization? How you can provide this feedback? Is this through engagement surveys? Is it through, town halls that maybe you can submit anonymous questions to? I think, there are, it's speaking and trying to find others who understand your viewpoint and can help you, right? Like, there has to be somebody else in the organization. I think it can feel very lonely, but I think if you can start talking to your peers and colleagues as a starting point, I think getting that support is critical.
Joanna?
One of the things that I've never done in my career, which I did, and kind of taking a different version to this, but I've always been afraid of going to HR, human resources. And I did have a huge obstacle with one of the companies that I worked for. And really with with the support and championship also from my husband and also others and my mentors, that was the direction that I went. I was definitely afraid because I was, it's been 20 plus years now. However, it was a direction that failed me as well. But that failure, it wasn't, it was actually a great failure because it made me realize that that was not the place that I needed to be at. And I felt that, in order to be in an organization, the environment, the culture, the leaders, there has to be transparency. There has to be, that, and as Lenore pointed out, within OEB, there's that, safe culture of having ERGs where you can go to them. And I think that to me, that was a huge eye opener. So I'm a lot more mindful now, even when I recommend certain companies to other individuals, making sure that they're aware. It's don't look at the dollar signs necessarily. Look at also the culture. Ask questions because at an interview, you're also interviewing that other employer and employee, right? So again, going back to that two-way discussion. But that's just something that I was thinking about when Lenore is talking.
Thanks,
You're
Joanna.
absolutely right. It may not be the right organization for you. Like maybe you have to think about that, and it's time to move on and find a better workplace culture that's going to support you in your career growth. And it can't just always be about dollar signs, which I know isn't always easy, but.
Rebecca, any thoughts on that for pieces of advice for those who are maybe struggling to be heard or worried about if they do bring up concerns that there's blowback, and that could be from leadership, male or female?
I will say, if you work in with an employer that has a union, get involved in your union. Union partners are an opportunity to have your voice amplified. They go beyond just collective bargaining rights about really working with the employer to collaborate to make workspaces better for employees. And I will amplify what I heard from both Lenore and Joanne. It's about leaning on your networks and your coworkers. Be curious, ask questions about how your environment's set up. Reach out to different networks of ERGs. I know those are quite common. And really, truly, one piece I've always found that seems to make perhaps a bad manager step back is ask for feedback. Say, in your role or where do you see me fitting in to your workspace? And what that really does is that allows that individual to go away and say, okay, I have an engaged employee who wants feedback because they are part of this workplace culture. And engage and ask for manager wants to remove meetings. Find out where you fit in that workplace. And to Lenore's point, it may not be for you. And there are a lot of opportunities, in other spaces. But those are ways in which I would approach it.
Thanks, Rebecca. And one of the things that was mentioned a few times, we talked a little bit about, mentorship, sponsorships being brought up a couple of times. Allyship is so important. I would say having a strong mentor. So it's building that network. Joanna, you've mentioned that a couple of times. Having that network around you that you can go to them to say, I'm having a challenge, I'm having an issue. Am I imagining this? Am I being overly sensitive, or am I really experiencing this? What should I do? And really your mentor should be someone that can provide you with very frank feedback, right? You might not always like the feedback that you get from your mentor, but to me, that's the most perfect mentor you can get is when you're having such a strong relationship with somebody that you can trust and has your back. That is absolutely invaluable. And you may have multiple mentors, and you'll especially ideally, you want to have mentors as you go through and navigate your career right throughout your career. But building those folks around you who are supportive of your career is, I think, absolutely invaluable. I got a couple of questions for you, but and I'm watching time. We have 11 minutes left, and there is one other in the chat. This is one I ask a lot, actually. And it's, what is the best piece of advice you received early in your career that helped you get to where you are today? Thanks, Olivia, for the question. Anyone like to jump in on that one? Best piece of advice as you were getting started, or you could even flip it and say, I'll give people the option, either the best piece of advice you got or the best piece of advice you wished you got and would give to a woman starting out in their career nowadays.
So for myself, I mean, I think you've touched upon it. Your net worth really is your network. And so I think that's huge. I think creating your own kind of personal board of directors who are going to support you, whether that's through mentorship or coaching or your peers, your friends, your partner, you know, you need to lean on people and get support and get different perspectives as you're kind of growing and navigating your career. And I think that's so important, but also your ability to collaborate and socialize ideas. Like you can't do things in isolation on your own. And I think that's really where your success lies, in your ability to make sure that people feel included, and you know, if you have a new idea that you're bringing forward, you're championing an initiative, like how are you socializing that and not just doing something in isolation and getting more people involved? I think that's really critical.
Rebecca?
A tough one. I think it's about making the space your own. But I think we can all probably attest to the fact that we've worked in many places that wasn't made for us. But make it your own, and make it your own space, and be a part of that workplace culture and bring what is unique and diverse about you and the skill set that you bring to that environment. And don't be afraid to do so. That is the piece I wish I would have gotten, because I probably would have slept more.
I love that.
Truly.
I love both. I love though that you're a personal board of directors. And trust yourself. Really trust your value, even at a young age, or no matter where you are in your career. And I think a lot of times women second guess themselves a lot, right? And again, goes to Joanna saying, you know, we don't apply for the jobs unless we're like 90%, we can fulfill 90% of what's on that list, rather than just looking at it 50%. You know what? Say, you know what? I can bring something to this. I'm going to go for it. So sometimes we need to get out of our own heads. Joanna, your thoughts on that one? Advice you would have liked to receive, or like that you would give now?
Get yourself involved as soon as possible with different organizations that are out there, whether it's EHRC, Step Up Energy, Wire, you know, study of United Professionals. There's so many organizations that we collaborate together, and it's really important to get out there. And I definitely say this, just as Lenore said, your network is your net worth. Get yourself, you know, involved in the right organization, that you have a safe space, you're able to talk. I think that a majority of the time, like I do find that if we have a question, but we're afraid to voice it, I'm fairly certain that majority of people in the same room have the same question. So don't be afraid of your voice. Ask it, question it. Also, one thing that I do want to share with the audience is don't be afraid to ask for the right title. Because a long time ago, when again, going back to my WIN days, I asked for a title, and basically I was told, well, no, titles don't matter. They do as you're navigating your career. And, you know, again, this was told to me by an old dinosaur. And I feel that make sure that you're asking for that, because if you don't ask, you're not going to get. And right now, I think with the dinosaurs and now baby dinosaurs, you know, those are things that we need to be on the watch, and also, you know, call them out. But
Love that.
always ask.
I love that, Joanna. Baby dinosaurs. I love that fact, because there are still people there that we need to educate. So we've about 6 minutes left. So I have two questions. So I'm going to go two lightning rounds. And this one I kind of call my uncomfortable truth. So we can keep it sort of short and sweet, but I'm going to ask each of you for one direct reflection. And that is, what is one uncomfortable truth that our sector needs to confront if we're serious about gender equity? Joe, I'm going to go to you just because I think that was a good segue from your last remark.
That's a really great. I love that. I think that we need to stop viewing diversity as a risk to operational excellence. I think we need to make sure that everyone's seated at the boardroom table, and that we, you know, that we definitely are engaging with one another. I think that it shouldn't be a matter of sexes. It should be, again, going back to what I said earlier, it should be all hands on deck.
Fantastic. Lenore?
So I think it's that we keep hiring women into systems designed for men and then act surprised when the outcomes don't change. And I think, a key point for me is how do we reintegrate women who have gone on parental leave? How do we encourage men to also take parental leave? These are big chunks of time that can be taken out of women and men's careers. And how do we re-onboard them when they come back and they're returning? Like, that's really critical. I think that's where we lose a lot of people.
Rebecca?
I think that we need to stop being so rigid. I think that the old ways no longer serve the new needs. So it's time to be innovative and think outside the box.
I love
But
that.
we
I
will
love
not
that for our
get,
industry.
yeah, will not get the folks we need to do what we need to do.
No, that's so true. Okay, I'm going to close on a forward looking note. If we were having this conversation again, 2 or 3 years, what gives you hope from a progress perspective? What does meaningful progress look like for you? And again, we're going to keep it relatively tight. So if everyone could keep it to about 30 seconds each. Lenore, I'll go to you first this time.
All right. So as I was preparing for this, I started looking at the huge list, and I'm going to go over 30 seconds. We have Carolyn Caldwell, CEO of the Ontario Energy Board, Leslie Gallinger, President and CEO of the ISO, Josie Erzarek, the President and CEO of Electrical Safety Authority, Jenna Mosley, President and CEO of Toronto Hydro, Nicole Butcher, President and CEO of OPG, Megan Telford, incoming President and CEO of Hydro One, Amanda Klein, President and CEO of Alexicon, Teresa Sarkisian, President and CEO of the Electricity Distributors Association, Michelle Herodens, President of Enbridge Gas, not to mention my co-panelist, Michelle, CEO of EHRC, Rebecca, President of the Society of United Professionals, and of course, Joanna, President of WIRE. That is incredible, right? Like this energy sector right now is that in the cadre of women CEOs leading the sector is so impressive to me. That gives me optimism. What I am concerned about, though, is that that glass cliff phenomenon, and that we promote women to these C-suite roles, but we don't give them the resources, the support, the that they need to thrive and succeed and stay there. And that is where I think we can have some improvement.
Fantastic. And Ontario is really leading it from a female leadership perspective. Got to love it. Rebecca.
I think what I'd say is we have an opportunity for impact. So we all understand what needs to be done. And I think amplifying the messages of today, and very much to Lenore's point, like this is an opportunity, but the decisions we make today have impact, and they must reflect future needs of communities. So that's what I would say. We have an opportunity to make a real driving change for the future.
Wonderful, Rebecca. Joanna, last word to you.
Well, I hope that the wires of today no longer are existing in 3 years, but I'm not very optimistic about that. So keep pushing forwards, onwards and upwards. And I think that the world needs a lot of our voices to have that support.
Thanks, Joanna. And I'm just going to echo, if anyone has not gone to a WIRE event here in Canada, and they're around the world global now, it is a really great way to increase your network and your own personal board of directors, and engage with employers and the folks who can help support your career. So we'd really encourage you to do that. So everyone, that was just amazing. I'm watching my time. We could have talked for ages. I'm so glad we got to cover what we did. Thank you for such thoughtful conversation. International Women's Day is not only about recognizing achievement, it's also about what kind of sector we're building next. And I think we got there today. And we know how to manage risk in this industry. We know how to manage performance. We know how to plan for the future. But gender equity really does need that same level of discipline and commitment. And so thank you for your honesty, your leadership, and for everyone who joined us today. Before we close, I would really want to just take a quick 10 seconds to invite you to continue this conversation, because there's lots more to come. And we are taking Agents of Change 2026 to the beautiful city of Montreal this year. We're going to be there on the 13th and the 14th at the Marriott Chateau Champlain. And it's going to bring together leaders from across the sector, across the country, to go deeper on equity, safety, and accountability. So I hope to see many of you there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you again to all my speakers.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and our lovely panelists, Joanna Osave, Lenore Robson, and Rebecca Caron, for this thoughtful and honest discussion. We appreciate your leadership and the clarity you have brought to this conversation. It's really good. And I would highly encourage you all to please take a moment to fill the quick post-event survey that is being posted in chat right now. Surveys like these really help us improve our sessions and learn what you want to learn in future. Once again, thanks to all four of you, amazing women, for sharing your personal experiences and your professional experiences. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.